making his way right now towards the checkered flag. It's a 7th win in 2025 for the championship leader, who extends his lead out in front. Lando Norris wins the Sao Paulo Grand Prix. But who's going to come second? Antonelli ahead of Verstappen for his best Grand Prix finish ever. Kimi Antonelli takes second place. Verstappen from the pit lane comes home to finish on the podium. What an effort from him. George Russell holds off Oscar Piastri.
All right, there we go. That was the conclusion to this morning's Brazilian or Sao Paulo Grand Prix, as heard there from Fox Sports. It was a very eventful Grand Prix, but in the end, Lando Norris started from pole, and he was far too good, winning comfortably over Kimi Antonelli, Max Verstappen, and Oscar Piastri back in 5th. Plenty to chat from the Grand Prix this morning. Michael, a very good afternoon/evening to you. Thank you for joining us, mate. So were you up at the early hours watching the Grand Prix this morning?
I was, and I don't think there's anywhere in the country that's a good answer, to be honest. Still feeling the effects, and unfortunately the outcome for Australia wasn't great either.
What time did it kick off over in your neck of the woods, Michael?
It was a 4 a.m. start for me, so it's almost edging towards barely acceptable, but barely would be at most.
It's better than Perth. I think 4 a.m. over 1 a.m. is certainly an advantageous start for you as opposed to us. What did you make of the Grand Prix, mate? Lando Norris, was he clearly the best driver all weekend, and was he a deserved winner?
He was. He was the form man for the entire weekend from start to finish. Topped every session, practice, sprint qualifying, and the race. That's as comprehensive as it gets, so he takes home maximum points, which is exactly what he needed for his championship campaign. Credit, though, and perhaps we'll talk about it in a moment, but to Max Verstappen, too. I think was the fastest man in the Grand Prix, though. It took Red Bull Racing's third attempt to set up the car. They took him off the grid and started him from pit lane to make some pretty massive changes and give him a new engine as well. And he was rapid. I think had he started any higher, had he not had the puncture and had to make an emergency pit stop on lap 8, he probably would have won the race, perhaps even comfortably. But that's sort of the way luck is coalescing around Lando Norris a little bit, because it's probably counted Verstappen out of the title hunt now, and it means it's now very much a straight fight between the McLaren drivers.
For those that aren't aware, can you just talk to us about that Verstappen situation? He was so hot there for a few weeks. His last couple of Grand Prix, the last Grand Prix and the start of this weekend, he seems to have gone off the boil a little bit. Qualifying was terrible. The sprint wasn't great. And then they've decided to change the engine heading into this Brazilian Grand Prix. He started from pit lane and he's just been rapid. How does he become fast? And then he has a couple of off weeks and then they decide, oh, this is the time we're going to change the engine, and he's rapid again. How does that work in Formula One for those that aren't aware?
Yeah, it's a good question. And look, if the answer was super clear, then I'd probably be an engineer at Red Bull Racing. But I can give you, of course, an outline of how they believe it's all worked, which is car's been pretty ordinary for a lot of the year, but it's been ordinary because it's very hard to set up track to track. It behaves a little bit erratically. Maybe it doesn't like temperature changes, certain corners, bumpiness, curbs, all sorts of different things through the year. Brought an upgrade mostly to the floor, which is the most important aerodynamic part, after the Dutch Grand Prix, the Italian Grand Prix, and that widened the window and made the car a bit faster as well, but just enough that suddenly Max Verstappen, who is the greatest of his generation, I think we can probably say, was able to unlock the pace in the car. And you can see he's doing the business, and his teammate, unsurprisingly, over the last few years, hasn't been able to do it. But it's still not as wide as other cars. So we get to a track like Mexico, which is really unusual, super high altitude, which means the cars just work in a really weird, dramatically different way that they do in any other circuit. A little bit hard to get in the window. Wasn't that great in qualifying, but in the race was pretty good. Finished a competitive third, it was, or could have finished second. Then Brazil is a little bit weird again. Very bumpy track, different kinds of tarmac. The weather was very up and down. At one point, I think there was a cyclone nearby as well, which I don't know has ever happened for this race before. Much harder to get into the window. So the reason they took it out of pit lane was to make some very significant setup changes, including rolling back some upgrades back to when the car was working. And the new power unit is simply because the engine's over time, like any engine, loses performance. So they thought there's no penalty once you're already starting from the back. Let's give it a new engine as well, throw everything at it. And it was the third time they'd made a massive setup change over the course of the weekend. This time they got it right, and suddenly the car was in its sweet spot again, and everything looked like it had about a month ago.
Well, it just seems to be unravelling at the moment, Michael, unfortunately, for our very own Oscar Piastri, and it's just been a bit of a snowball effect across these recent Grand Prix.
Yeah, snowball, I think, is really the way to describe it, because it's no one thing that's really gone wrong for him. And barring, of course, Azerbaijan, where he crashed out, had a pretty ordinary weekend there. Then US and Mexico, where he was genuinely off the pace in the way we haven't seen all year. It's not as if there's been a collapse in his performance in a really general sense. There hasn't been any really major reliability issues or anything like that. It's just now been a compounding of several factors that every weekend there is a problem he's overcoming. This weekend, for example, his pace was actually pretty good. He had a little bit of a dud qualifying session, but in a session which a lot of drivers failed to get the most out of the car, including Lando Norris, despite him getting a pretty tremendous pole. He did the best of anyone, but no one strung together their best lap, and he unfortunately started fourth, but not that far back. But then you think about the sprint. Unlucky, okay, it's always a driver error when a driver crashes, pretty much. But unlucky to cop a curb that was dry the lap before, but suddenly was wet when, of all people, Lando Norris happened to spit some water up onto the track by going a little bit wide himself. And then in the race, this penalty that's proved extremely contentious. I'm finding it harder and harder to find anyone who agrees with this penalty. Unlucky to come off that because he would have been, I'm pretty confident, second at least. In fact, his race pace in the second half of the race was pretty good relative to Lando Norris, so who knows, maybe could have come away with a win, but instead comes away with another fifth place and now is 24 points behind. So it's gone from bad form to bad luck, and unfortunately the result is that championship is slipping away.
What do you make of the penalty that he got? I saw an article this morning that stated the words the great Ayrton Senna once said: if you no longer go for a gap that exists, you're no longer a racing driver. Oscar Piastri went for a gap. I personally feel that Kimi Antonelli had cause to leave him a bit more room. He didn't. They collided. Leclerc was collateral damage and out of the Grand Prix. Piastri copped a 10-second penalty, and that was the reason he was more or less shunted from a podium. What did you make of that incident and the subsequent penalty to Piastri?
Yeah, I completely agree. I think the move was clearly on. The more replays I've seen as well, obviously in the hours after the race, it also seems pretty clear that Oscar wasn't just, as I'd originally thought, alongside him at the mirror, which is the minimum required by the guidelines the steward used to decide penalties, but at one point is pretty much fully ahead of him, or fully alongside him, I should say. He breaks first, though, because in the inside line, that changes the dynamic. Perhaps that's what the stewards were thinking of. But for me, and as I said earlier, an increasing number of people who I talk to for opinions on this, different perspectives, this shouldn't have been a penalty. There is a little bit of blame on Oscar just simply for the fact that he was on the inside. There's always risk when you're going for overtake. That's sort of natural. But it is shared at least equally with Kimi Antonelli, who closed the door on him. Incidentally, I don't think it was a malicious move of an aggressive kind by a young driver or anything like that, because he said when he hit the brakes, which was later than Piastri, as I said, suddenly Piastri wasn't in his mirrors anymore, thought he was free, should have known better, I think. Piastri wasn't suddenly going to not be there, and had plenty of room on the outside because Charles Leclerc was playing the numbers there and giving him a lot of room. Unfortunately, it turned out not to be enough because he was taken out of the race. So I think really rough penalty. I think it should have just been a racing incident, at worst a reprimand or something like that, a non-sporting penalty. But the worst thing, of course, is being early in the race means that you have to serve it at your pit stop. It's not a post-race penalty that McLaren could then go to the stewards to appeal. They can appeal it, but it's not going to mean anything because the points have been lost.
Yeah, it's very harsh for Oscar. Does that mean, in your eyes, that his championship tilt is over? Is there any way you can see him coming back and attacking Norris for this title in Las Vegas, Qatar and Abu Dhabi? And Max Verstappen, has he shown enough throughout the race this morning to suggest he's still a faint hope?
I don't think Verstappen can count himself in, and he said now he's not in anymore because he's as good as 50 points out, which is 2 race wins, which is, a lot. He would need at least 1 DNF from both Piastri and Norris, especially Norris, really, to get in it, if not 2, and that's sort of pushing the boundaries of what's acceptable. He's not mathematically out of it, of course, but he's getting close. Piastri, I don't think you can say it's over yet because it is still less than a race win. We've seen how quickly, just in the last few rounds, things do change in Formula One and how quickly momentum does seem to shift. And Las Vegas being the next race, probably a weak McLaren track, that's sort of an opportunity and a risk for Oscar. Of course, that means maybe fewer points will be available. But if Norris trips up there, because they'll presumably, or they're thinking that they will be battling in the pack more. I mean, we've seen Oscar was only 4th and all of a sudden was involved in this penalty situation. Anything can happen there, but it is tough. 24 points is very close to a full race win, which is 25 points. And the mathematics of it now is that Oscar can win all 3 races in the last sprint as well, and Norris can finish second and still win the title. So it sort of tells you that Norris needs to have a little bit of a weak race somewhere, and Oscar needs to be perfect. You'd have to say on recent form that that's unlikely. But, earlier in the year, that was Oscar's modus operandi. He was the best operator in Formula One, the slickest, and Norris had plenty of poor races as well. So it would require going back in time a little bit, but we can't say it's finished.
Las Vegas is a street circuit that can throw a few spanners, that's for sure. Before we let you go, Red Bull, looking ahead to 2026, who partners Max?
I think it's probably going to be Isaac Hadjar. Yuki Tsunoda just hasn't shown the consistency of form in these crucial last few races when he knew a decision was going to be made. There have been some faint signs, and you can argue it's rough on him considering no other driver has been able to drive that car either. And next year the rules change, and the idea is maybe that car becomes a bit easier to drive, but you're only as good as your last result. And unfortunately for him, it seems like that's not going to be good enough either to keep that seat and probably, by the sounds of things, either keep his drive in Formula One, because I think at Racing Bulls it'll end up being Liam Lawson and Arvid Lindblad, the Formula 2 driver, they're pretty keen on. So it's touch and go. You would never want to second-guess Red Bull Racing making driver decisions, but that's the way I think it's moving.
I'd be targeting Oliver Behrman if I was one of the top teams and had a vacant spot as well. I reckon he might be on a short list. But what are those changes that we can expect, the major changes in 2026?
So these are the biggest regulation changes probably in the history of Formula One. I think we've said that last time, but I think this is genuinely the case this year because cars completely different, movable aerodynamics completely different to the way they work now. Brand new engines as well, brand new power units. So both car and engine is changing, which is really rare in Formula One to happen in 1 year. Last time the engines changed, which was 2014, pre-season testing was just non-stop engine failures. No one thought any car was going to finish the first race. There were a few failures, but they did make it there. But it's going to be fascinating because it's a real reset of the form guide. Of course, we still expect the big teams to be the ones doing the best job, but anything can happen really next year because it only takes one team to, find the right loophole or the right clever idea and, of course, have the right engine, and suddenly you've gone from the back to the front. So it's going to be a really fascinating season. And, of course, most driver contracts expire at the end of next year as well, at which point every driver will know who's got the best car and everyone will be trying to get in it.
So you think reliability could be a big concern next year? We saw it going back 20 or 30 years, half the field wouldn't finish. It's very rare that you sort of have a driver retire because of reliability these days. Is that something that could come back?
I think it will come back. I don't think it'll be at the levels of the 70s or 80s, but really, again, we look back to sort of 2014 here, we did see plenty of reliability issues. None of them, not a litany of them to the sense that drivers are regularly not finishing, although if we think back even to Daniel Ricciardo in 2018, off the top of my head, I think he had 7 retirements maybe out of about 20 races. So actually, that is quite a few, isn't it? So it is very much a live option. There are rules written to make sure that engines that are blowing up regularly can be upgraded in a way that will stop that happening. But I'd be surprised if we didn't see reliability emerge as a pretty major factor just because there's so much change. Plus, we've got new engine builders as well. Red Bull is building its own engine, for example, and Audi is coming in for the first time. When Honda came in for the first time, for example, the engine could barely finish a race. So I think that'll definitely become a storyline.
Well, I'm looking forward to it, that's for sure. Michael, thank you so much, mate. This is our final Monday Drive show, the final time we'll speak to you. Thank you so much for all the times you provided great insight on the world of motorsport over the past year or so, and hopefully we'll chat to you soon at some point.
Thanks, Michael.
Absolutely, guys. It's been my pleasure. Thank you very much.